Okay, let's begin.
Good morning, Patriot listeners. This is Political Pitchforks on AM 1280, The Patriot. I am Susan Smith here with Jeremy Munson, my co-host, and our special guest today is Ryan Wilson. And Ryan ran for auditor. I believe he won. And now he is running with Lisa Demuth to put an end to the fraud in Minnesota and to actually try and save the state from the corruption that is plaguing us and costing us billions of dollars. So we are very glad to have you today.
Thank you very much.
And before we get started, I want to just put in one plug for Precinct Caucus. This is kind of our last effort to get people out for caucus. On Tuesday, every 2 years, we have the opportunity to have local involvement in our political parties, the Democrats, Republicans, both. So if you're a Democrat, go to caucus. If you're a Republican, go to caucus. Get involved. It is at the caucus where we build the infrastructure of both of our political parties. Our political parties form the foundation of our entire infrastructure in our state. And if you do not go to caucus, you are basically giving up your one opportunity that you have to really directly involve and impact those processes. So I encourage you to go. You can find your precinct caucus location by going to the caucus finder at the Secretary of State's website. Go to the websites for either of the political parties, mngop.com. They have it on their website. I'm sure the DFL has it as well. So just search it.
Actually,
go to caucus.
if you go to caucusfinder.com, caucusfinder.com.
There you go.
It redirects to the Secretary of State website to find it. Punch in your address, find which party you affiliate with, and go caucus.
Go to caucus. We are in a disaster, and we need the people to show up and show that we care. This is how we prove it. We care. We go. It's not a couple hours of your time. It's not. We're not asking you to, march in the streets and light fires. We're asking you to go to caucus and do it the right way. That's where you politically get involved. Go to your caucus. So. You got a caucus turnout plan? What are you doing?
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's great being here. And as you mentioned, I ran for state auditor in 2022. I'm Ryan Wilson, running as lieutenant governor candidate with Lisa Demuth. Ran for state auditor in 2022. Came up just short. Traveled the state talking about fraud. 8,000 votes, 0.3% short of winning the first statewide race.
Boy, were you right then? Boy, were you right.
Back then, I'd ran around the state talking about this thing called Feeding Our Future, and people would look at me like, "What is that? Never heard of Feeding Our Future." $250 million in fraud at the time.
Right.
I mean, now that seems teeny compared to what's the latest? $9 billion, $10 billion. Some people say $18 billion. It just keeps.
It's never going to end.
So, but I guess go back to this caucus thing real quick before that is essential. We talk about the grassroots, and the grassroots are really what moves the party. The people that get motivated and get our candidates elected, and it's how we're going to win is by supporting the grassroots. Think of this as planting the seeds for the grassroots, right? Caucus is where it all starts, and laying that foundation and getting that turnout. And so people, every election, people ask, why don't we have good candidates for governor? Why is this the guy that we're voting for? Where's this XYZ person? And that process starts next Tuesday. People can have a voice. They can make a difference. They can speak up. They can persuade their neighbors and say, this is who we think should be on the ticket, for our governor race.
Yeah. And I like to say, 20, 25 years ago, when I didn't like who we had as our elected officials, and I would say, well, who picks these people, right? You get to the ballot and you're like, oh my gosh, this is who I have to choose from. So then you're like, oh, there's a primary in August where you can actually vote to thin the herd and choose your candidate. And then if you don't like the people in the primary, you can get involved earlier at the caucuses and become a delegate and actually meet the people, have them call you, basically interview the people that want to run. Yep. And then you can become a delegate and choose the people that will be, endorsed by the party. And this is where you get involved.
And it's such a great process because as a delegate, you can get that one-on-one interaction with the governor candidates. You can shape the things that are important to you, right, that they should be thinking about. You can raise issues they might not have been aware of, and you can maybe persuade those candidates why this is something that they should be campaigning on.
Yep.
And in Minnesota, we have a long history of supporting the endorsed candidate. I can't think of an example of where an endorsed candidate that was a non-incumbent governor didn't end up
on the Republican side. Yeah, I mean, nobody wanted Tim Walz on the Democrat side, but he primaried the endorsed candidate, right, and he won. Yeah.
I mean, I think Minnesota has one of the best systems in the country. In the 70s, there was an attack on the caucus system nationwide. Really, it started after the 60s, early 70s. And there was an attack on the caucus movement, and it was really a shift away from the people deciding, the people who know best their local people. And you can get in discussions about whether or not it's, should be more of a state issue, state legislatures versus the statewide candidates. But truthfully, it's like sports, I think, that we have an opportunity at that local level. It's like winning a division championship. Who gets the endorsement, right? And then they're going to go against the other people. And it's a time for Republicans who I think we have we are weaker on building our bench than the Democrats. The Democrats are very active in training their people. We don't do that. And so really by having that an aggressive primary process, it forces our endorsed candidate to be better, to rise. Because if you can't beat another Republican, how are you going to beat a Democrat anyways? So we should not be afraid of having this two-step process. I don't understand why we're afraid of it. I think it's, the money.
We're afraid with it because it happens in the middle of August, and we have 46 days of voting. So
we could do it earlier.
Yeah, we should.
And I think there's a lot of cases to be made to move in the primary earlier. Obviously, the presidential primary got moved up to March. Yeah. And no, but the caucus process is great. We're abiding by the endorsement. From day one.
Let's talk about that quick because we had 14 candidates running for governor on the Republican side. We had Chris Mattel drop out last week. Or this week, and then now we have 13. How many of the 13 have agreed to abide by the endorsement?
My understanding is 4 have. Us, Lisa Demuth, and I being one of the 4.
So then we got Qualls, Knight, and there was another candidate.
Well, the guy from St. Cloud.
Jeff Johnson.
Yes.
Not that Jeff Johnson.
Different
the other one.
The other Jeff Johnson. The St. Cloud Jeff Johnson.
So 4 candidates are agreed to abide. The rest may go to primary. Haven't ruled it out. And that, of course, when you go to the primary, it's only a plurality that's required for winning that. And so with 5 or 6 candidates there, you could win the primary with 20% of the vote.
Well, and I think one of the problems that we have is, again, goes back to this timeline, because there was a decision made to put our convention where the endorsement happens the last weekend of May, which is May 31st. The deadline to register for the primary is June 2nd, but early voting starts 3 weeks later. So the endorsement historically has had power because it gave the endorsed candidate an opportunity, a window of time to use that endorsement to reach out and really make their case to the people. But we've eliminated that in essence now with 45-day voting because it is so late. So I think this is part of the reason why there are people hesitant to say they're going to abide by it, because they don't know how, even if they got it, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
We get divided. So we've had in the statewide elections, we've probably had 40 or 50 statewide campaigns since Pawlenty won. He was the last person to win statewide. And of all those races, Ryan, you came the closest to winning statewide. Of the 50 races that we've had since Pawlenty left, you came 0.3%. 0.3%, just 8,000 votes shy, or 4,000 votes you needed to have flip to win that race. That was really close. And of course, with all the fraud and election irregularities and everything else, you still came within striking distance.
Can you imagine if we had a different state auditor these last 4 years, maybe how things would have gone different in the state?
Yeah.
Well, and let's just say, to me, I was looking at you and Jim Schultz as kind of like a tag team to deal with this problem. And there was a ridiculous complaint filed against Jim Schultz right at the end, which hurt everybody in the party, right? The Democrats targeted him with a complaint that ultimately ended up with not getting the $3 million fine the media talked about, but I think $3,000 down the road, and it was ridiculous. But right at the end, it came in and had a very serious effect, and he was not far behind you despite that. Right. The two of you, had you two won, which I think that complaint alone might have tipped the scales, even though I think you won anyways, but actually on paper. Can you imagine if the two of you,
right,
the auditor, and him, can you imagine?
Well, I think that your point goes back to that's just the classic lawfare that the Democrats engage in. And I've seen that. I'm an attorney, and I've seen this for years, and I've been fighting multiple times in the Supreme Court for election integrity. And so there is a chance to win, and that's going to be part of something that we'll roll out later as an election integrity plan. A lot of questions we get while we're traveling around is, how are you going to make sure that we have a fair election? What is your plan going to be? And so stay tuned for that. We have some very good things that can be modeled after what Trump and the RNC did last election cycle. But we have to go be proactive about making sure that I'll give you an example. So one of the issues that came up, I had an opportunity to meet with President Trump last October when he was running. And one of the things he talked to me about was he loves Minnesota. We must have talked for 4 or 5 minutes about Minnesota. And he said, make sure we have fair elections there. Do what you can to have fair elections there. Well, we come back, and I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but we brought a lawsuit. I represented the Minnesota GOP in it to make sure that Hennepin County had an equal number of Republican and Democrat election board judges on the election board. And that's something that was passed after the Coleman-Franken election because there were different around the state, different counties were interpreting the statutes differently. The outstate greater Minnesota counties were a little more letter of the law, whereas just the metro counties were a little more loose.
Right.
And that law was important. It wasn't being enforced. Hennepin County was ignoring it. We won in front of, I think an all-Democrat appointed Supreme Court. So.
Yeah, well, that's great. When we come back, we're going to talk more about what your role is going to be as Lieutenant Governor and get into the fraud talking about all the issues in front of this campaign. You're listening to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot. I am Susan Smith here with Jeremy Munson and Ryan Wilson, candidate for Lieutenant Governor with Lisa Demuth. She is leading the charge against fraud. That is her goal. And I think it's really important that the listeners get a sense for what your campaign really sees as the biggest priorities for Minnesota.
And I think fraud has to be right on the top of that list. Because what fraud is, it's theft of people's tax dollars. And when you're stealing somebody's tax dollars, you're stealing their time. You're stealing little parts of their life, right? I mean, people go to work to be able to make money, put food on their table, save for retirement, maybe a vacation, something for their kids' college. And when people have to work more because fraudsters are taking that money and it's getting shipped off to Somalia, that's stealing directly from them and their tax dollars. And so it goes to kind of the heart of everything that we do here in Minnesota. And then not to mention what those dollars are supposed to be used for, right? Helping people that legitimately need it. And we need to make sure that there's integrity in these programs, that fraud is being rooted out. And so that's one of the top priorities for us is going to be really ending fraud and making sure that we can shrink that budget because, a big portion of the money isn't going to fraud.
Yeah. I love the way that you framed it. I like to tell people that April 15th is probably the average day that Americans stop working for the government and they can switch and start working for themselves. Some of us work until June for the government. Some people just start the year working for themselves. But when the tax dollars are being stolen, like you said, you're a slave to these people that are stealing your money, right? This is about restoring people's money. I always say that the government can't spend a dollar that it hasn't first taken from someone else. And so when fraudsters are stealing that, they're stealing from someone directly. And that's a great way to frame it.
I mean, you say you're working until April 15th for the government. How much longer are you working for the fraudsters or for the people of Kenya that are getting hotels bought over there or Somalia that money's funding there, right? And so,
right. Or the money that we're seeing right now, I think, that is flowing to these NGOs that we pretend aren't government related, but actually are directly connected to the government, really. And we're actually paying Americans to destroy America,
right,
through these NGOs.
So I think it's important for people to realize that when they don't have the money to maybe get that extra tutor for their kids so they can do better in math, when they don't have the money to be able to do those things with their family, buy that extra set of clothes for that kids or those new sneakers or whatever it might be you want to use in your family, that's because we've had a government that hasn't cared about their money, their tax dollars, their time, their family. And that is a core platform of the Democrats. And this can be laid squarely at the feet of the entire Democrat Party, whether it be Tim Walz here in the state or Amy Klobuchar out nationally, who I don't think she's mentioned fraud in years. She's ran for president, once officially. I think she was out in New Hampshire last cycle. And, across the board, state, local, federal, they've turned a blind eye to it because they benefited from it. And I think it's time for accountability. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing in the Wilson's lieutenant governor, one of the things we're going to be doing under Lisa Demuth's governorship is appointing myself, the lieutenant governor, to really take charge on fraud. And the statutes allow that. The governor's allowed to delegate responsibilities to their lieutenant governor. And that's something that I'm really going to lead the charge on. I think I'm uniquely positioned for that because of, one, the work I did in the past. I ran a small business, grew it to a large business. Big part of what we did was auditing clinical trials, making sure that when people were submitting data to the FDA to get approval for, pacemakers, stents, defibrillators, that data wasn't fraudulent. But also just understanding businesses and processes, both on a small and a large scale. Really having that lieutenant governor that can work across agency to root out these problems. So nobody can point at somebody else, right? We see people right now that are fraudsters going after DHS and MDE, and neither the two shall meet under Governor Walz and the Democrats. And so we have to change the culture. It has to permeate all of our agencies, and I think that's something that when Speaker Demuth came up with this idea of, hey, let's have the lieutenant governor, let's have you, Ryan Wilson, go and be that fraud person to root this out everywhere, or anti-fraud, I should say, person to root this out everywhere and to make sure that our agencies are talking cross-agency. That's a wonderful idea, and I'm all in for that. And I think it's something that can be unique about our ticket and unique about the next Republican governor, the next governor administration is, again, taking a serious effort to root out this fraud, not just a cursory, beating on our chest, we're ending fraud.
So on social media today, I saw that you guys launched a 4-point plan for attacking fraud. Do you want to just give us the high-level points on that, what you're planning on doing?
Yeah, I mean, point number one is, pointing myself to oversee the fraud plan, not oversee fraud. I keep saying that. Anti-fraud is what ensuring that the fraud doesn't happen and making sure that across the board that it's being rooted out. We also need to make sure that we're instilling processes and a culture of fighting and finding fraud. So that means that we're going out and inspecting, unplanned inspections. I mean, how many places do we hear time and time again that, they never were inspected or nobody went out and visited? When the feeding our fraud issue was first exposed, I remember reading the FBI's search warrant that one of the reasons that Department of Education gave that they weren't able to root out fraud is because of the work-from-home policies of Tim Walz. They weren't willing to go drive out,
Yeah.
and see.
So you had work-from-home inspectors? Is that what I hear?
Exactly. So it just gets back to bring up, just comments. If you want to find fraud, and we've seen these people that are coming out and exposing in these videos and all these other. I think years ago, you yourself, you had mentioned you had visited.
Yeah, it was when I was in session. So it was it snowed. We went over to 2 daycares in South Minneapolis and one up in like Brooklyn Center and sat outside. And there were no footprints in the parking lot, no footprints on the sidewalk. 10 o'clock in the morning, 10, 11, 12. It was they're not open. And at that point, I was on the Health and Human Services Finance and Policy Committees, and they testified in front of us that over half of the $240 million a year was fraud. Over half. And many of these places didn't exist physically, or if they did, they shut them down. They opened right back up again. And they were just blatantly saying, look, they get $27,000 per kid for daycare or whatever the dollar was, and that the parents get like 30-40% of that money.
And the irony of this is, I don't know if you guys know anybody that runs a legitimate daycare facility. I know some people run in-home daycares. They're inspected once a quarter, and these are, every little corner of their kitchen has to be padded, right? And every little gate has to be locked, and all the food. I mean,
we've talked about this in the past, that the reason we had a daycare crisis in Minnesota is because the Democrats they launched a full-out assault on home daycare providers who were taking care of the kids in the neighborhood. Like when we were growing up, this mom was home and that's where the kids went, and she got, that is literally why they created a crisis in daycare by saying to these neighbors taking care of their neighbors' kids that we're going to come into your home and make sure your fire extinguisher has the right year on it and that you don't have, dust on the shelf or whatever. And people said, I don't want the government coming into my house whenever they want. No, who wants that? I don't care who you are. Nobody wants that because we've weaponized government. And one of the things I think also that we should just mention is that the good companies in Minnesota, the honest companies, the small business owners, and very large companies that aren't receiving contracts with the governors, because, there isn't really a great bid process. There's all kinds of things changed with COVID, right? And so there are good companies that are not expanding in Minnesota, that are leaving Minnesota because they recognize that it's not an environment friendly to actual business owners. And so what's happening is local people don't have businesses in their companies, which affects the tax base in their cities, which affects their property taxes, which there's just such a domino effect. And we know, well, I don't want to get into all the issues with the riots and the companies that are writing letters about how do we partner, because we need to partner. But let's face it, when 60 CEOs from companies across the state send a letter saying we have a serious crisis in Minnesota, Cargill isn't going to expand here. They're not fully leaving Minnesota, but they're laying people off. We have a problem. And that problem, the buck stops at the top of our government. And right now it's a Democrat sort of trifecta. Yes, we have a power sharing agreement, but functionally the Republicans can't fix it.
Or nothing can pass without Democrat approval right now.
We can't fix it. So there is one way to fix it. Let the Republicans try. How about you give us 2 years? Let's let the Republicans try to fix it. See in 2 years what we do. And then there's a referendum. Because right now it's failing everywhere.
I think that you make an important point, and people have to realize that it really does get down to Governor Walz.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution requires that he take care to execute the laws.
Right.
And by all means, would you say these Democrats are taking care to execute these laws? So the Republicans, Speaker Demuth, her first, she came in the legislature in 2019.
Yeah.
I think it was her first bill, or one of the first bills she introduced, was to require people receiving CCAP to have attendance logs, daily attendance logs, of who the kids are, and that they had to be available immediately upon inspection. Here we are, how many years later now? It's the same
Right.
problem, same tune. People, we've talked about this. People have known about this fraud issue.
Right.
We've known about the suitcases, the things reported on Fox 9. Everybody was demonized at that time for talking about
Yep.
this. It's a conspiracy theory. These conspiracy theories keep coming true.
Right.
And, but these, you got to ask yourself, why did the Democrats in 2019 block Lisa Demuth's bill to be able to require something as simple as attendance logs?
Right.
And why has it been a block after block after block? The Republicans have been in the minority in the House Lisa's entire time until she got basically a tie now. And why are they blocking this? People should really reflect on that. What possible reason would you not want to hold people accountable?
Right.
And
Well, I can tell you the reason. It was because it was racist. I was on the House floor and had Ilhan Omar stand up, and when we were talking about the CCAP issue and the daycare fraud, and someone mentioned the word Somali, and she got up and she screamed racist and pointed her finger at us. That's what the protection was back then. This is not about one specific ethnic group or nationality. This is about, you have a program, you're getting paid to do this. You need to show us that the people receiving this are qualified. And it's not just at the state level, it's at the county level. The counties are the ones that actually do most of the verification of eligibility for the people receiving this. Even though the money doesn't go to the kids, it goes to the daycares, it's on behalf of the people that have applied.
What a great segue. So that's point number 3 of our plan is we need to be able to be bringing back from the counties who are determining these eligibility requirements, or that to be more central or regional based. I mean, they've shown that either they're not able to do it correctly, or they're not willing to, or they want to abuse the system. And I think that,
Or as I've been told, assessors are told that they are not allowed to change previous assessments.
so we need a
What?
So that's why we need a system that the governor can be more accountable for. And right now, the governor can point to the counties and blame them, and we need a governor. Governor Demuth will be accountable for that.
When we come back from the break, we're going to get more into the details. Everybody's complaining about fraud, but let's talk about what we actually do to stop it going forward. We're here with Ryan Wilson, Lieutenant Governor candidate, and Political Pitchforks.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot. I'm Jeremy Munson, a former state rep. We're here with Susan Sjogren-Smith and Ryan Wilson, Lieutenant Governor candidate for the Demuth
Wilson ticket.
Demuth Wilson ticket. It's hard to describe everything. I want to just take a step back and look at the race in general. Obviously, we have 13 Republicans running, lot of activity running for the endorsement. We may have a primary. When Tim Walz announced he was resigning, or not resigning, when he was not going to run for re-election, retiring, I was excited. Some people were upset because they thought Tim Walz was our greatest hope of winning the state. I was told long ago that he was not going to be the candidate by Democrats. And I also see when Amy Klobuchar announced she was going to run, people thought we didn't have a hope. But I know that there's going to be some far leftists that get involved in this race because Amy Klobuchar is the Democrat of 20 years ago. I don't think she represents the majority of Democrats today because they're kind of far left socialists. She may vote with Joe Biden in the Democrat Party in D.C., but she portrays herself as being this hot dish Amy here, even though when she ran for president, the national media exposed her for being one of the most vindictive, evil members of Congress. I think she had the highest turnover ratio of anybody in the Senate. There's just stories about the eating salad with a comb and and yelling at staff. So it'll be an interesting campaign. But last night I saw a website called draftemq.com. And this stands for Aaron Mayquade, who's a radical lefty state senator who supports everything that passed during the DFL trifecta, all the bad stuff that's happened the last 4 years. EMQ is all over this stuff. And, the trans refugee law and everything else that's been happening, they want to draft her for governor. And, of course, usually when you see these draft websites or whatever, it's usually coming from the campaign itself.
I think what's interesting about that is
And Mitch Berg.
There really is no policy difference between Aaron Mayquade and Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar will support every single thing that happened during the trifecta, has never disavowed a single thing that they passed, a single extreme measure. Look, when she ran for president, she wanted health care for illegal immigrants. That's something that was passed here, something that made a magnet for people to come to Minnesota, something that Speaker Demuth was able to get out of our budget and hopefully stop that magnet from bringing folks here. But if you look at the records between Amy and any of the other Democrats, they're lockstep. I think what you're seeing there, though, is people want someone to be vocal on their issues, and that somebody like an Aaron McQuaid or somebody that's going to stand up, because what we're seeing for Amy Klobuchar is she's going to run away from that. She wants to portray herself as this kind of milquetoast moderate Democrat, when even though she believes and votes for all those things. And so that'll be an interesting clash in their party to see if they can get somebody that's willing to speak up and not be afraid to really say who they are.
Well, as we get more people on the left entering the Democrats race, Amy is going to have to admit where she stands on some of these issues, exposing her to the hot dish Amy crowd, that she's not just this moderate, that she actually has extreme opinions. So we'll see what happens on that side of the race. The only thing I like about Amy Klobuchar, and I supported, was when she spoke out pretty critically of the electronic voting machines about 10 years ago. And I would like, yeah, she's right. We shouldn't have, national or, these electronic voting machines. But of course, that's now the talking point of conservatives.
And of course, it's all about whose ox is getting gored there, right?
Yeah, that's true. So back to talking about fraud. We were talking in the break about some of the just amazing things that are happening on fraud that are just continuing to go. My wife a few months ago read an article about a well-intentioned piece of legislation that the legislature passed that said if you have homeless kids or highly mobile kids, they called them, like maybe kids couch surfing because their parents were evicted or whatever, that the school district should pay to go out and pick up these kids with just a van or whatever to get them to school, to at least have consistency in their school life. And the bill passed saying that the schools would be reimbursed 100% for this. All of a sudden, Minneapolis Public Schools turned in receipts for like $7 million in transportation costs under this program, which would be basically like, 3 times all the kids in all the schools or something. I mean, just ridiculously. High. Programs like this just infuriate us as taxpayers. And it's not even something that you can fix. You just have to shut these programs down because, or have more accountability. The bill should have been written to say the teacher needs to sign off on this, proving that this kid was, picked up or highly mobile or showed up to school or whatever, instead of having no accountability whatsoever.
Well, and this is classic Democrats. They'll come out and they'll identify an issue, and I think what you described is an issue. It's worthy of some kind of solution, right? I mean, we want to be able to make sure kids are getting to school, but then they put these programs in place that, kind of maybe address the issue, but really just end up being a boondoggle and no controls on them, just throwing money out, shoveling money out, and it really shows just don't care about the taxpayer. They don't care where that money is coming from because it's not their money, right? According to them, and there's not good stewards of it. And so that's one of the parts of the Demuth-Wilson plan, is that we're going to make sure that all of our agencies have, not just are they talking across agency, but that they have tools in place for every program that's doling out money to make sure that money isn't going. It's looking for these signals like we're talking about, right? That money isn't going to fraudsters, that programs aren't being abused. AI, all these kind of modernization things. But I tell people this: if you look at any of these programs that have been in the news that are being abused, you don't need AI or a supercomputer to say when something goes from $1 million a year to $200 million a year. You just need common sense. You need somebody that cares enough to be able to look and say that's not right. And Democrats they haven't done that, right? And I think they've lost that public trust.
Right. So my background's in finance, and I worked in I worked in trading floors, institutional stock trading floors, and I got into electronic order routing, and then eventually into algorithmic trading or high frequency trading. And the stock markets themselves have these circuit breakers that they put in place that if something moves so fast, it trips the breaker and shuts it down. Right. Freeze. Everybody freeze, something's going wrong. Right. We need these types of circuit breakers in government.
Absolutely.
And in addition, I was required to take 2 weeks off in a row, no contact with work every year. It was part of the anti-money laundering because I had access to billions of dollars. And we need this type of thing in government too, to say, there's periods of time where this person can't have contact with their agency if they're overseeing these programs, because if they're part of this money laundering or fraud that's going on in government, that we're going to find out about it. We have to apply the anti-money laundering rules to many of these agencies that are handling billions of dollars in federal funds as well.
And once that money leaves, one of the questions I get is, are we getting the money back, or where's our money going, right? And some of it's federal dollars, some of it's state dollars. I know you and I were talking earlier about there's some potential bills coming down at the federal level, right, to be able to address how do we get this money back, or at least how do we start making sure that people are complying with us. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about
Yeah, I should plug this for Finstad. So Brad Finstad, congressman down in CD1, introduced two bills that are so common sense, but hopefully they'll be included in the reconciliation package. One of them basically would empower the president to put pressure on foreign governments when we know money has been going to Somalia in order to get the fraudsters back that have fled there or the money returned. So that's a pretty simple bill. And then the other one, which is also pretty straightforward, it just requires the government to shut off program money if the states don't show that the recipients actually were eligible for these benefits. Right? I mean, it's there already. It says, hey, you have to meet these eligibility criteria to receive benefits. But if they don't, it doesn't say that the government has to shut them off.
I have to imagine, hopefully those will get out of the House. Then when they get to the Senate, surely Amy Klobuchar would vote for those two common sense anti-fraud measures. Somebody that's been silent on fraud her entire career. You got to imagine, right? Can't imagine she would vote against a reconciliation bill that would have such good anti-fraud measures in it. So time will tell.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
You gotta vote to support your base. She knows that.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Right?
games that are played in the Senate. I know that right now Peggy Flanagan is attacking Angie Craig because Angie Craig supported the Lincoln Riley Act, which is the reason why we have all the ICE officers here for this surge to take criminal illegal aliens out of the states. I believe Amy Klobuchar did not vote for it, but she voted for a motion that allowed the bill to proceed, which is basically the saying you support it, but you didn't vote for it. She supported this too, and that's important when we talk about these common sense measures. Like, of course, we want to remove the violent criminal, illegal aliens from our communities, and when we talk about people that are up, protesting in support of this affected community, of this targeted community, nobody's protecting that community, right? The hardened criminals.
Well, I think it's important to remember that, we don't have to spend too much time on this, but all the stuff that we're seeing right now and the kind of chaos, this is Democrat-created chaos in Minneapolis, and it's happening.
Conveniently timed.
And it's happening because we had open southern borders that Senator Klobuchar supported with Joe Biden, voted lockstep with him. She promoted things like healthcare for illegal immigrants. And then we had open borders that were opened by Amy that allowed people to flood across, the southern border. And you got to ask yourself, why come up to 20 degree below Minnesota? What is it here that attracts people? And it's because the Democrats rolled out a red carpet with magnets like free healthcare for illegals, free tuition for illegal immigrants. And so that put us in the spot that we're in today, where we have these enforcement actions that are happening. And then layer on top of that, Democrat policies to not cooperate, not honor things like
Sanctuary city
detainers.
policies.
So this, yes, the media is framing it one way, but I think common sense people in Minnesota say this is a result of Democrat policies.
Well, I disagree with you on one thing. I don't think that this is the whole reason of the protests, because Michigan had the same policies and they don't have the protests. We're having the protests here because we're addressing fraud in Minnesota, and this is a distraction. This is an organized distraction to change the narrative away from fraud.
We are having the problem here because Minnesota has a long history of being at the core of the corruption that, whether it be election issues that go back to the Norm Coleman race, we have a long history in Minnesota of being the testing ground for how they grow a movement. And whether it be Paul Wellstone, who was one of my mentors, or whether it be the color riots that they are starting that are modeled after what they did in Europe and other places around the world, that we have a serious problem that Minnesota is a perhaps passive participant. Many people don't understand it, but they are testing, teaching, training in Minnesota. We have to stop.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot. I'm Jeremy Munson with Susan Smith and Ryan Wilson, Lieutenant Governor candidate. And we were talking about fraud primarily in this program. We started talking about the protests and the ICE surge and everything else. And I want to share a I don't know what you call an ex post. Is it a tweet still? Can we call it a tweet? Is it wrong? Is that?
I call
I'm
them
not a
tweets.
boomer, but
One's
I'm going to call it a
kinda
tweet.
like Dayton's, Macy's.
Yeah. All right.
Twitter.
So former Representative Dean Phillips, who was right, by the way, to run against Joe Biden because he was too senile,
Only guy.
and he deserves
To tell you
praise.
the truth.
No, RFK ran too.
No, but
You-
he's the guy that told the
You
truth.
mean when Amy Klobuchar and Tim Walz went out and said that Joe Biden was fit to run for office, they were wrong?
They were wrong.
Right.
And Dean Phillips, you were right. Another thing that he was right about was his ex post today. He says this, quote, "It's common sense to deport undocumented criminals, and I encourage Governor Walz, Mayor Frey, and all state, local officials throughout the country to cooperate with the federal government to that end," unquote. Now, I reposted that, and I said, 1, make sure this isn't a parody account, Jeremy. Check. 2, reread it to make sure that I'm reading this correctly because it sure sounds fishy. Check. 3, check to make sure that the statement that he's making the statement that he's not making the statement ahead of his governor launch for his campaign. And it appears to be that he's not running for governor yet.
It's early.
But that was an
Plenty of
incredible
time.
statement. I think he was bold and honest, and that's what we need to come to. All local officials need to understand we just want to deport criminal, illegal aliens, which is the purpose of this ICE surge. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it should be pretty non-controversial that violent criminals should not be in our communities, walking among us, right?
Right.
Especially if they're not supposed to be here in America. Get them out.
Dean Phillips is the guy working probably with Ken Martin, who's in D.C., but to claw that DFL party away from the abyss of progressivism back to Minnesota common sense. He's working hard.
He's trying.
He is the reluctant politician. He doesn't want to get involved. Somebody's got to be the grown-up in the room. Give him time. Watch out, people.
So, back to fraud. What's the fourth plank of your new fraud platform, anti-fraud platform?
Well, I think we had the new commissioners in, the lieutenant governor being in charge of the fraud. We had requiring things like unplanned, routine but unannounced inspections, and then bringing in tools like AI to be able to ensure that we're finding fraud early, like some of these signals you're talking about in the banking industry, things that are common sense elsewhere. We find that government isn't very common sense.
How about weaponized oversight boards, regulatory boards across the board?
Yeah. So, 2 things I'd like to ask you about. You're going to have, if elected, you're going to have hundreds of appointments in state government, right? The governor didn't do this himself. It is literally the cooperation of dozens, if not hundreds, of state bureaucrats, many of them appointed, who have been participating or actively looking the other way during these crimes.
Yeah.
Going through and I don't want to say cleaning house, but you're going to be having a lot of appointments, political appointments in the administration that will help attack this fraud.
Well, here's the case in point on that. So the previous commissioner of DHS stepped down, and the person that was appointed was responsible for overseeing compliance with federal programs. So think about that. Think of the world that we're in with our lack of compliance with our federal programs and our oversights. And that person didn't get fired, didn't get demoted, got promoted.
Promoted.
I was just looking through some old posts because people said, well, you were in government, Jeremy. Why are you running for state senate? Because you were part of the problem. And I went back and I found, the bill that ended CCAP. I actually ran a program called Stop the Pork, Can the Ham.
Right.
Because
I love
because
that.
because was it Carolyn Ham was the inspector for DHS, and she had completely failed at her job, and we wanted her fired. And instead, she got promoted within the Walz administration. Are you kidding me? I wrote this letter with other legislators to Walz saying she needs to be fired for her gross incompetence, and instead she was promoted.
Nothing by silence like a good promotion.
Yeah, 2019.
And so to be clear, one of the things Lisa Demuth has made absolutely clear is that when she gets in there, it's a cleaning house. You touch fraud, you are near fraud, you're gone. There is no second chance. There is no, well, the old boss told me this was okay.
Right.
You stood by, you did nothing. You don't get a second chance to waste taxpayer dollars.
Okay. So you heard it here, guys. There's going to be 4,000 government bureaucrats that are out door knocking for whoever their candidate is to save their tails. So we need you guys to sign up to be door knockers for Republican candidates statewide if we're going to win.
Well, I am confident that there are at least some good, well-meaning people in government that will be happy for a Demuth-Wilson administration because there are people out there that want to do good and to help the people that need these programs, and they see the abuse. But what we see time and again in some of these whistleblowers is they were told not to speak up, right? And so we want to make sure, and this goes back to that first plank of, again, having a lieutenant governor that's empowered to go across agencies, that whistleblowers don't feel like there's a dead end, that they know that there's somebody that they can eventually get to when they're ringing that alarm bell that can come and do something about this fraud.
Fantastic. You were announced early to be a lieutenant governor pick. I've talked to a lot of people who are fans of yours, maybe even more than Lisa, just throughout the grassroots people. Jensen just picked a lieutenant governor candidate. Has anybody else chosen a lieutenant governor?
I have not heard of any others, no.
Okay. So you guys are going into the endorsement. After caucus next week, you'll be calling all the delegates that were elected at the county level or the BPOU, the Senate District level, encouraging them to run to be delegates to the state convention. So these conventions, for everybody that doesn't know, at their local Republican Party will be happening throughout late February, throughout March, that you'll go to the convention if you're elected delegate at caucus and can run to go to the state convention. I think it's in Duluth this year, right?
It is, yes. That's part of what I love about this process is since I got in, I've been able to contact delegates, whether that be delegates to State Central or potential delegates that are going to be at the next state convention, and just having these conversations, but ever short, 15 minutes to an hour, talking about war stories, talking about my experience, talking about things that I've been able to do to help move the party over the last 4 or 5, 6 years. Just great conversation. I don't think I've had a bad conversation yet. And even coming in here today, I had a conversation with somebody that started off, I'm not a fan of, Speaker Demuth for XYZ reason. Well, let's talk about that. And we had a conversation over an hour, and I got to a point where they were going to consider her, and we're going to have a follow-up conversation. And that, again, is part of, I think, the value of this process is having those intimate conversations and being able to cut past, some of the lies on the social media or the, broadcast media and really get down to here's what we stand for, here's what we're going to do, here's our credibility, and here's, why you can trust in us to fix government.
Yeah. I really hope that, Jeremy and I talk a lot about politics and the money in politics. I believe more and more people are going back to this idea that I want to talk to you. I want to shake your hand. I don't care what level you're running for. I want to eat. If it's not you, it's somebody closely connected to you as an agent, because I think that people are looking at the money and they're recognizing it's like a big giant RICO operation. It's literally just funneling money and manipulating a process. It's not real. It's just not real. And they want to talk to you, and they want you to look at them in the eye. And maybe some people can look people in the eye and lie, but most people can't. Most people can't. And so people want that. People are hungry for leaders they trust. We're hungry for it.
And I think the important thing is, because people call and they'll disagree about something, and Lisa's very pro Second Amendment. She, the Democrats attacked her as saying she is the single person responsible for them not being able to ban guns, and so I call people, and some people aren't Second Amendment fans. And so we'll have conversations. We'll agree to disagree. We'll do it agreeably. Right. But we'll talk about here's these other points that we have. Right. Here's other reasons you can like us. And at the end of the day, you look at the totality of what the Democrats offer, the totality of what our ticket offers, and I think Minnesota is going to be better under us. And they usually agree with that. But what you can't do is just pander to people. If you call someone up and you just you're trying to adjust your position to what they think you want to hear, people pick up on that as being disingenuous. And so. Now, my commitment, I'm not going to lie to you. I might not tell you what you want to hear. I'll hear you out. We can have an open dialogue, but don't have to agree with everybody about everything.
Right.
I talk to people for hours every week, and especially about the gubernatorial election. And my goals this year are to win a majority, because I'm running for state senate. I want to serve in the majority, and I want to have a Republican governor. Yep. And when they talk about, will they sign constitutional carry? Will they sign the heartbeat bill? I said, you know what? They're going to probably sign whatever bill we send them from the legislature. And I know a lot of the Republicans running in the legislature are not going to be supportive of some of the most conservative Republican bills. Right. We have a lot of moderate Republicans in the legislature. So whatever bill that we can agree to send over to the governor, I'm assuming that they're going to sign. That should be the biggest one. And
that is a really important message that people need to take away on the Democrat side, because it is not a moderate Democrat legislature. They are an extreme progressive legislature, and Amy Klobuchar will sign anything that comes through them to her desk. Yep. And so buyer beware.
Yeah.
100%.
Ryan, what's your website and how to get involved?
lisa4mn.com. And if you want to caucus, you can go to lisa4mn.com/caucus, and we're happy to keep you in the loop on how to do that.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure getting to know you on the show, and wrap it up.
Yeah, I think we have to close it by the same way we started it, that every Minnesotan has an opportunity in just a few short days to go to their local caucus, to make a difference, to meet their neighbors, to talk about what matters to them, to talk about candidates. There's a preference poll for the governor's race. Vote in that poll. Send a message. And by the way, that's important because no matter who wins that poll, it's going to send a message to the other candidates about what matters to people so that our candidates get on board with the people of Minnesota so that we actually have candidates that can win this time. So go to caucus, do your duty.